Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Lucas, and I've just had the rug pulled out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my wife Talia, and even my stepdaughter Maren feels like a lie. It all started about 6 months ago when Maren, my stepdaughter, told us her college tuition was increasing. Talia was adamant that we couldn't let Maren take on loans, so I agreed to step up. I've always tried to do right by her, even though we didn't always see eye to eye. Talia painted this picture of us being this united family, and I guess I bought into it. I worked extra hours, cut back on personal expenses, and even pulled money from my retirement fund. Maren, in her usual dramatic way, acted like I was her savior, always thanking me publicly. It made me feel appreciated, even if it was just for show. Meanwhile, Talia played the supportive wife, telling me how proud she was that we were giving Maren the life she deserved. I didn't notice the cracks forming. Then came the first red flag. I was organizing our financial records when I noticed discrepancies in Maren's tuition payments. The amount I'd been transferring to Talia's account for Maren's college didn't match up with the receipts Maren had forwarded me. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe I'd miscalculated or Talia had used some of the money for books or living expenses. But something nagged at me. I asked Talia about it one evening after dinner. She brushed me off saying, "Oh Lucas, you're worrying over nothing. College expenses are complicated." She gave me this look like I was being ridiculous for even questioning her. That should have been my second clue. But the real blow came when I decided to dig deeper. I reached out to Maren's university to get a detailed breakdown of her tuition payments. They emailed me a ledger showing partial payments here and there, not the full amount I'd been sending. It was clear that someone had been pocketing the extra money. That someone was Talia. I confronted her that night. "Talia, can you explain this?" I said, showing her the documents. She barely glanced at them. "Lucas, I told you, college expenses are more than just tuition. Maren needed things. New clothes, a laptop, travel expenses. For $20,000? I snapped. "What kind of clothes cost that much? And why wouldn't you tell me?" Talia's face hardened. "Are you accusing me of stealing from my own daughter?" Her deflection hit me like a brick. This was the woman I'd trusted, the woman I married, standing in front of me acting as if I was the villain. I decided to stay calm and told her we'd talk about it later. But inside, I was boiling. Something didn't add up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I started piecing together every inconsistency I could remember. Talia's sudden work trips, the new designer bag she'd been flaunting, and Maren's increasingly dismissive attitude toward me. I'd chalked it up to her being a spoiled teenager, but now I wasn't so sure. And then there was Silas. I'd heard his name once or twice from Talia, always in passing. "He's just a coworker," she'd say. But something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. After that night, I started paying more attention. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I was determined to figure out what was really going on. I didn't want to believe my wife, the woman I'd shared so much of my life with, was capable of betraying me. But the numbers didn't lie, and the tension between us was growing. Talia became more secretive. Her phone was always face down, and she started locking it, a habit she never had before. Maren, on the other hand, seemed completely oblivious. Or maybe she just didn't care. She'd walk into the house, drop her expensive handbags on the counter, and complain about how stressful her classes were. One day, while Maren was out and Talia was in the shower, I decided to look through her phone. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, but I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut anymore. Her password had changed, so I had to wait for her laptop to sync her messages automatically, something she probably didn't realize was still set up. What I found made my blood run cold. There were text messages between Talia and someone named Silas. Messages that weren't just flirtatious. They were detailed, intimate. Plans for weekends together, discussions about their future, and worse, mentions of Maren. "Maren's on board with everything," one message read. "She thinks Lucas is clueless." Another said, "Don't worry, baby. Once everything's finalized, we'll be free of him." I couldn't believe what I was reading. Free of me? Was this some sort of plan to leave me high and dry? Maren was complicit in this? My hands shook as I scrolled through months of messages. Silas wasn't just some random fling, he was her lover, and together they were plotting behind my back. When I confronted Talia later that night, I tried to keep my emotions in check. "Talia," I said, holding up her laptop. "Who's Silas?" Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it, trying to compose herself. "He's just a friend," she said, too quickly. "Just a friend? So why are you planning a future with him?" I shot back. Her expression shifted from shock to anger. "You went through my phone? My laptop? That's an invasion of privacy. And you've been lying to me for God knows how long." I yelled. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. Who is he? What is going on?" For a moment, she looked like she was going to deny it. But then, with an almost chilling calmness, she said, "You don't understand. You've been so caught up in work and bills and everything else that you haven't paid attention to what I need." "What you need?" I could feel my voice rising. "I've been working extra hours, breaking my back, to pay for Marin's tuition." She cut me off with a bitter laugh. "Marin's tuition? Please. She's not even in school this semester." Her words hit me like a truck. I stared at her, waiting for her to say she was joking, but she didn't. "What did you say?" I whispered. Talia crossed her arms, her tone dripping with contempt. She deferred this semester. She didn't want to stress herself out. "But you wouldn't have noticed, would you? Too busy playing the martyr." I stood there, stunned. My mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. The missing tuition money, Marin's expensive lifestyle, Talia's lies, it all clicked into place. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying her words, her dismissive attitude, the texts I'd read. I didn't know what hurt more, her betrayal, Marin's involvement, or the fact that I'd been so blind to all of it. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let them get away with this. The next morning, I woke up determined to uncover the full truth. If Talia thought I was going to roll over and let her and Marin manipulate me, she was dead wrong. I started with Marin. She was lounging on the couch in her usual smug way, scrolling through her phone. Her designer purse sat on the coffee table like a trophy, and her nails, freshly done no doubt, clicked against her phone screen. "Hey Marin," I said, keeping my voice calm. "When do you head back to school?" She barely looked up. "What?" "Your classes," I pressed. "When do they start again?" Her expression faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, next week." "Really? That's strange," I said, pulling out my phone and pretending to scroll. "I just got an email from your university saying you weren't registered this semester." Her face went pale. "What? That's a mistake." "Is it?" I asked, stepping closer. "Because your mom told me you deferred." "So which is it, Marin? A mistake or another lie?" She stammered, looking trapped. "It's not a big deal, okay? I needed a break, and Mom said it was fine." I could feel my blood boiling, but I kept my tone steady. "You needed a break? From what, exactly? Living off the money I worked hard for? Lying to my face?" Her voice rose, defensive now. "Don't act like you're some saint, Lucas. Mom said you've been unbearable lately, always nitpicking and controlling everything." I laughed bitterly. "Is that what she told you? That I'm the problem here? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the two of you have been taking me for a fool." Marin grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I let her go. I had bigger fish to fry. Now it was time to deal with Talia. When she came home from whatever errand she'd been running, I was waiting in the kitchen with the laptop open. She glanced at me warily, sensing the tension. "Where were you?" I asked casually. "Out," she said, brushing past me. "With Silas." She froze mid-step, then turned to face me. "Lucas, I'm not doing this with you." "Oh, you're not?" I stood, my voice growing sharper. "You're not going to explain how you've been using the money I worked for to fund your little affair? Or how you've dragged Marin into this mess?" Her eyes narrowed. "I don't have to explain anything to you. This marriage hasn't been working for a long time, Lucas. You know that." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "That's rich coming from you. You've been plotting behind my back, lying to me every step of the way, and now you're acting like the victim." She stepped closer, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Always the hard-working, self-sacrificing husband. But you're boring, Lucas. You don't make me happy anymore." Her words cut deep, but they also solidified my resolve. If she wanted to destroy our family for some fleeting fling with Silas, fine. But she wasn't going to walk away unscathed. I leaned in, my voice low. You think you're getting away with this? Think again. I've already started gathering evidence. Your texts, your financial records, all of it. And I'm not just talking about the affair, Talia. What about the money you borrowed from the charity fund last year? Or Marin's little shopping sprees disguised as tuition payments? Her face went pale, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Lucas, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said, cutting her off. I understand that you and Marin have been scheming behind my back for who knows how long. I understand that you're selfish, manipulative, and willing to throw me under the bus for your own gain. But here's what you don't understand, Talia. I'm done. You don't get to humiliate me, steal from me, and expect me to just roll over. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't say another word. She knew I had her cornered. That night, I started making calls, to a lawyer, to the charity board, even to an investigator. If Talia and Marin wanted to play dirty, they were about to learn that I could play the game even better. By the next morning, I had a plan in motion. I wasn't going to let Talia and Marin destroy my life without consequences. They'd chosen to betray me, and I was ready to fight back with every tool at my disposal. The first step was to secure my finances. I went to the bank during my lunch break and opened a new account in my name only. Then, I rerouted my paycheck and withdrew a significant portion of the joint savings account. I left just enough for the household expenses, but nothing more. When Talia noticed later that evening, she was furious. "Where's the rest of the money, Lucas?" she demanded, cornering me in the living room. "I moved it," I said plainly. "You've proven you can't be trusted with it." Her face twisted in anger. "You can't just take our money like that." "Our money?" I scoffed. "The money I earned while you were busy sneaking around with Silas? I think I can." She sputtered, but there wasn't much she could say. She knew I was right. Next, I met with a lawyer to start preparing for divorce. I brought copies of everything I'd found, bank statements, text messages, even screenshots of Talia's plans with Silas. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Caroline, nodded grimly as I laid it all out. "You've got a strong case," she said, flipping through the evidence. "Infidelity, financial misconduct. This is more than enough to file for divorce and protect your assets." "Good," I said. "I don't want her taking another dime from me. And I want to make sure Marin can't bleed me dry either." Caroline gave me a reassuring smile. "Don't worry. We'll make sure you're covered." That night, I started digging into Marin's finances too. It wasn't hard to access her accounts. She'd never been particularly careful with her passwords. What I found didn't surprise me, but it did make my blood boil. Thousands of dollars spent on luxury clothes, handbags, and spa treatments. Meanwhile, her supposed tuition payments were non-existent. I printed everything and added it to the growing stack of evidence. Then I made my boldest move yet. I contacted the charity Talia had been volunteering for. I'd always suspected her involvement was more about appearances than altruism, and the texts I'd uncovered confirmed it. She and Silas had been skimming funds from the charity's accounts to fund their little escapades. I sent an anonymous tip to the charity board, including copies of financial records I'd found in Talia's emails. I didn't know how quickly they'd act, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The fallout started almost immediately. The next morning, Talia's phone was buzzing non-stop. She answered one call, her voice tight. "No, that's ridiculous. There must be some mistake," she said, pacing the kitchen. "I'll come in and clear it up." When she hung up, she turned to me, her face pale. "Did you do something, Lucas?" I shrugged. "I have no idea what you're talking about." She glared at me but didn't push further. She knew she couldn't prove anything. By the end of the week, Marin's lavish lifestyle began crumbling too. I'd cut off her credit card, and without access to my money, she had to face reality. She stormed into the house one evening, practically throwing her purse on the floor. "This is so unfair," she shouted. "You can't just cut me off like this." "Actually, I can," I said calmly. "You're an adult, Marin. Maybe it's time you learned to live like one." She looked at Talia for backup, but her mother was too preoccupied with her own problems to intervene. I could see the cracks forming in their carefully constructed lives. And I wasn't done yet. It didn't take long for the charity board to act on the tip I'd sent. Within days, they launched an internal investigation into Talia and Silas. From what I could gather through whispers in our small community, the evidence against them was damning. The financial records spoke for themselves, and Talia's name was all over them. One evening, Talia came home visibly shaken. Her usually confident stride was replaced by nervous pacing. I sat in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but I kept my focus on her. "They suspended me from the charity," she said, her voice tight. "Some idiot claimed there were discrepancies in the accounts. They're investigating now, but it's ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong." I raised an eyebrow. "Nothing wrong? Then why do they have your name tied to missing funds?" Her head snapped toward me. "What do you know about this, Lucas?" "Nothing you didn't already tell me yourself," I said coolly. "You and Silas seem to think you were untouchable. Guess you were wrong." Her face turned red with anger, but she didn't respond. She stormed upstairs, slamming the door behind her. But I wasn't done. I still needed to expose her affair publicly, and I wasn't going to hold back anymore. That weekend, I attended a community event where I knew many of Talia's social circle would be. I kept my cool, chatting with people and answering their casual questions about how things were going. Then, I dropped the bombshell. Someone asked about Talia, wondering why she wasn't there. "She's been busy," I said with a casual shrug, "dealing with some legal issues. It turns out there's been some financial misconduct at the charity she works with." Their eyes widened. "Really?" I nodded solemnly. "It's a shame, but the evidence seems pretty damning. And then there's her personal life." I let the words hang for a moment before adding, "It's no secret she's been spending time with Silas. I'm sure people have noticed." I wasn't outright accusing her in front of everyone, just planting seeds. Gossip spreads fast in a small town, and I knew it would only be a matter of time before the rumors reached her. Sure enough, the fallout was immediate. By the next day, Talia's phone was blowing up. Friends were calling, asking about the allegations. I could hear her shouting into the phone, trying to defend herself, but it was no use. Her carefully curated image was starting to crack. Maren, on the other hand, was still sulking around the house, furious that her financial lifeline had been cut. She tried to guilt me into reinstating her credit card, whining about how unfair I was being. "Unfair?" I said, finally snapping. "You've been lying to me for months, spending my money on designer garbage while pretending to go to school. And now you expect me to keep funding your lifestyle? Not a chance." She glared at me, her face red with frustration. "You're just trying to ruin everything, aren't you?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm just making sure you and your mother face the consequences of your actions. Maybe it's time you learned what that feels like." She stormed off again, but this time, there was no satisfaction in her tantrum. She knew she was losing. Meanwhile, I kept my lawyer updated on everything. Caroline was thrilled with how things were unfolding. "This is good," she said during our latest meeting. "The more their lives unravel, the stronger your case becomes. Keep documenting everything." And that's exactly what I did. By the end of the week, Talia was barely speaking to me, and Maren was avoiding me altogether. But I didn't care. I wasn't done exposing their lies and deceit. This was only the beginning of their downfall. The next step in my plan was making sure Talia's affair with Silas couldn't be dismissed as rumors. I needed undeniable proof, not just for my own satisfaction but to ensure that her betrayal was laid bare for everyone to see, especially in court. I hired a private investigator, a seasoned professional named Greg. He was no-nonsense and discreet, the perfect person for the job. I handed over what I already knew, Silas's name, the texts I'd found, and details about Talia's frequent errands. "Give me a week," Greg said confidently. While Greg was working, I focused on gathering more evidence at home. I combed through Talia's emails, bank statements, and even social media activity. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. She and Silas had been planning this for over a year. Trips disguised as business meetings, late-night rendezvous, and even discussions about moving in together once I was out of the picture. Maren wasn't just complicit, she was actively supporting Talia's plans. In one email exchange, Maren wrote, "Once Lucas is gone, everything will be easier. You and Silas deserve to be happy, Mom." The sheer audacity of it all made my blood boil. They weren't just betraying me, they were plotting my complete removal from their lives as if I were some obstacle to be discarded. Greg called a few days later. Got something you'll want to see, he said. Silas and Talia spent the night together at a hotel downtown. I've got photos, timestamps, the whole package. I met him at his office, where he handed over a folder thick with evidence. Pictures of Talia and Silas entering the hotel hand in hand, leaving the next morning looking disheveled, and even sitting in a cafe openly discussing what seemed like their plans. They didn't even try to hide it, Greg said, shaking his head. I thanked him and took the folder home. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, going through every photo, every piece of evidence. It was a gut punch, but it was also vindicating. I finally had everything I needed. When Talia came home that night, I was waiting for her in the living room with the folder on the coffee table. "What's this?" she asked warily. "Proof," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Proof of your affair with Silas. Proof of your lies. Proof of everything you've done behind my back." Her eyes flicked to the folder, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then she sat down, her face pale. "You had me followed," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "I did," I replied. "Because I knew you wouldn't tell me the truth. And now I have it. You can't talk your way out of this, Talia." She stared at the folder, her hands shaking slightly. "Lucas, Don't," I cut her off. "Don't insult me by pretending to explain. I don't want your excuses. I just want you to know that it's over. I'm filing for divorce, and you're going to face the consequences of everything you've done." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but I stood up, cutting her off. "You should start thinking about how you're going to explain this to Maren," I said coldly. "Because I'm done cleaning up your messes." I left her sitting there, silent and stunned. That night, I slept better than I had in months. For the first time, I felt like I was regaining control of my life. Talia and Maren's web of lies was unraveling, and I wasn't going to stop until it was completely destroyed. The day after my confrontation with Talia, I decided it was time to have a real conversation with Maren. She'd been avoiding me ever since I cut her off financially, but there was no hiding from this. I waited until she came home that afternoon, arms full of shopping bags. I stepped into the doorway of the living room, blocking her path. "Maren," I said, my tone firm, "we need to talk." She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed. "What now?" "Sit down," I said, motioning to the couch. She sighed dramatically but dropped her bags and sat. I stayed standing, towering over her. "Do you want to explain why you've been lying to me for months? About school, about your expenses, and about your involvement in your mom's affair." Her face twisted into a scowl. "Oh, here we go again. You're obsessed with playing the victim, Lucas." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep calm. "This isn't about playing the victim. This is about the fact that you and your mom have been scheming behind my back, using me like a personal ATM while plotting to leave me in the dust." Her eyes darted away, her confidence wavering. "I don't know what you're talking about." I picked up the folder of evidence Greg had given me and dropped it on the coffee table. "You sure about that? Because I've got plenty of proof that says otherwise." She hesitated before flipping through the pages. As she saw the pictures of Talia and Silas together, her face fell. Then she reached the emails and texts, some of which were hers, and the color drained from her cheeks. "You had no right to look through my stuff," she snapped, her voice shaking. "I had every right," I shot back. "You've been stealing from me, lying to me, and helping your mother betray me. Don't talk to me about rights." She stood abruptly, her voice rising. "I was just trying to help Mom. She deserves to be happy, and you." "And I what?" I interrupted, stepping closer. "Worked myself into the ground to give you everything you needed? Trusted you when I shouldn't have? You're not the victim here, Maren. You're just as guilty as your mother." Her bravado crumbled, and she slumped back onto the couch. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she mumbled. I thought you'd just move on." "Move on?" I repeated, incredulous. "You thought I'd just roll over while you two tore my life apart?" She didn't answer, staring down at the folder in silence. For the first time, I saw something that almost resembled guilt on her face. "Almost. This stops now," I said firmly. "I'm done being used. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm making sure you and your mother face the consequences of your actions. You're both going to learn what it feels like to live without me cleaning up your messes." Her lip quivered, but I didn't care. She stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. "You're a bitter, controlling old man," she spat before storming out the door. I let her go. The fallout hit Maren almost immediately. With her credit cards cancelled and her mother distracted by her own problems, she suddenly found herself facing a harsh reality. No more shopping sprees, no more luxury, no more easy money. I heard through the grapevine that she tried asking friends for help, but most of them only cared about her when she could keep up with their expensive lifestyles. Without the facade of wealth, her social circle began to dwindle. The few friends who stuck around probably didn't realize just how dire her situation was. I made sure of that. When she came home one evening, slamming the door behind her, she found me sitting at the kitchen table. "Your landlord called," I said, not looking up. "Apparently, you're behind on rent." Her face went pale. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "I made it clear I wasn't funding you anymore. Guess your mom forgot to tell you that when you two were busy plotting behind my back." She opened her mouth to argue but closed it again, defeated. "You're an adult, Maren," I said coldly. "Figure it out. Or maybe you can ask Silas for help, since you seemed so eager to help your mom destroy our family for him." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her bed, and now it was time to lie in it. By the end of the week, Maren had moved back into the house, begrudgingly, of course. She tried to act like it was temporary, but I knew better. She had nowhere else to go. And honestly, I wasn't done yet. Maren might have thought her world was crashing down, but she was about to see just how far I was willing to go. Maren's return to the house felt like having an uninvited guest who refused to leave. She sulked constantly, stomping around and slamming doors, but I ignored her tantrums. I'd long stopped caring about her attempts to guilt or manipulate me. Talia, on the other hand, was quieter. Too quiet. She barely spoke to me, her defiance from earlier replaced by a nervous tension that hung in the air. One night, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. Talia's voice was low, urgent. "We need to stick together. If he wins, we'll have nothing." Maren replied, her voice shaky. "But what if he already knows everything? He's got all this evidence, Mom. What do we do?" Talia snapped, her tone cold. "Don't give up. He's bluffing." I smiled to myself. Let her believe I was bluffing. She'd find out soon enough that I wasn't. The next morning, I woke up early and left the house before either of them stirred. I'd made an appointment with Caroline, my lawyer, to finalize the divorce filing and discuss the legal angles. We went over every piece of evidence I'd collected: financial fraud, infidelity, and Maren's complicity. Caroline assured me that Talia's actions would weigh heavily in my favor, especially since I'd been the sole provider. "You've done everything right, Lucas," she said, closing the folder with a firm nod. "This isn't just about divorce anymore. With the charity fraud, you're looking at possible criminal charges for her and Silas. Are you ready for that?" I didn't hesitate. "I am." She made her choices. Now she gets to face the consequences. That same day, I reached out to the charity board to provide a formal statement about the financial misconduct I'd uncovered. They were already in the process of filing a police report, and Talia's name was front and center. By the time I returned home, the atmosphere was even frostier than usual. Maren glared at me as I walked through the door, her arms crossed. "What did you do?" "What I should have done a long time ago," I said, brushing past her. Talia stormed into the room, her phone in hand. "You've ruined everything, Lucas. The charity board is threatening legal action, and Silas won't even answer my calls." "Good," I said flatly. "Maybe you'll finally understand what it feels like to have your life turned upside down." She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want this, Lucas. I just wanted to be happy." "Happy?" I laughed bitterly. "You were happy stealing from me, lying to me, and dragging our family through the mud? Spare me the excuses, Talia. You brought this on yourself." Maren stepped forward, trying to defend her mother. "You're going too far, Lucas. She's still your wife." "No, Maren," I interrupted, my voice like steel. "She's not. And as for you, you're just as guilty. You stood by her, helped her lie, and used me. Don't think for a second that I've forgotten that." Maren's face crumpled, and she stormed upstairs, slamming her door behind her. Talia stayed behind, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I loved you once, Lucas," she said softly. "No," I replied, my voice cold. "You loved what I could give you. That's not the same thing. The next few days were a whirlwind. News of the charity fraud spread quickly, and Talia's reputation in the community was shattered. Silas, ever the coward, tried to distance himself from her, leaving her to face the fallout alone. Maren, meanwhile, retreated into herself, sulking in her room and avoiding me entirely. Then came the legal papers. I handed Talia the divorce filing during dinner, setting the envelope in front of her without a word. She opened it with trembling hands, her face crumpling as she read. "This is what you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's what I need," I said, standing up. "You made your choice, Talia. Now I'm making mine." I left her sitting there, the weight of her actions finally crashing down on her. Upstairs, I heard Maren sobbing, but I felt no sympathy. They'd both had plenty of chances to come clean, to fix things, but they'd chosen betrayal instead. As I lay in bed that night, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time in months, I was free from their lies, manipulation, and deceit. I wasn't done yet, but I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. The days that followed were eerily quiet. Talia spent most of her time locked in the bedroom, avoiding both me and Maren. Maren, on the other hand, was visibly unraveling. Her once flawless confidence had been replaced by frantic energy as the reality of her situation sank in. One afternoon, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her laptop. When she noticed me, she snapped it shut, but not before I caught a glimpse of a search for emergency student loans. "Looking for ways to clean up the mess you made?" I asked, my tone sharp. She glared at me, but there was no fire in her eyes this time. "Do you have any idea how hard this is for me? You're cutting me off completely, and Mom's useless now. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "Figure it out," I said coldly. "Welcome to adulthood, Maren. It's not as fun when you have to take responsibility for your actions, is it?" She opened her mouth to retort, but then she broke. Tears streamed down her face, and she buried her head in her hands. It was the first time I'd seen her genuinely cry since this whole mess started. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," she choked out. "I thought Mom had a plan. She said you'd just let it go, that you'd never fight back." "Well, she was wrong," I said, sitting across from her. "She underestimated me, and so did you. But here we are." Maren wiped her eyes, sniffling. "I didn't want to lose everything, Lucas. I just wanted Mom to be happy." "And what about me?" I asked, leaning forward. "Did you ever stop to think about how this would affect me? Or did you just assume I'd keep playing the fool?" She didn't answer, her silence speaking volumes. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "Here's the thing, Maren. You're young. You've got your whole life ahead of you. You can still turn this around if you stop blaming everyone else and start taking responsibility. But if you keep going down this path, you'll end up just like your mother, bitter, manipulative, and alone." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of understanding. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. "You start by being honest," I said firmly. "With yourself, with me, with everyone. And then you work to earn back the trust you've lost. It won't be easy, but it's the only way." Maren didn't say anything more, but she didn't storm off either. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, she understood the gravity of what she'd done. While Maren grappled with her new reality, Talia's world was crumbling even faster. The charity board had officially filed charges against her and Silas, citing embezzlement and fraud. Silas, predictably, was trying to pin everything on Talia, claiming she'd acted alone. One evening, I found her sitting in the dark living room, clutching a glass of wine. She looked up when I walked in, her face hollow and tired. "They're going to take everything," she said quietly. "The house, my reputation. Everything." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "You should have thought about that before you betrayed me." Her eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. "I was stupid," she whispered. "I thought Silas loved me. I thought I could have a fresh start. And instead, you burned everything to the ground," I said, my voice hard. "You didn't just betray me, Talia. You betrayed yourself. And for what? A man who abandoned you the second things got tough." She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to fix this, Lucas." "You can't," I said bluntly. "This isn't something you can undo. You just have to face the consequences and hope you learn something from it." For once, she didn't argue. She just sat there, broken and defeated. The next day, I met with Caroline to finalize the divorce proceedings. She told me that with the criminal charges against Talia, the court would almost certainly favor me in the settlement. Her credibility is shot, Caroline said. And with the evidence you've provided, she won't be walking away with much. You'll get the house, the majority of the assets, and if you want, full control of the finances. That's exactly what I want, I said without hesitation. The paperwork was filed that afternoon, and by the end of the week, Talia was served. She didn't even react when she saw the documents, just quietly signed where she needed to. Maren, meanwhile, had started applying for jobs, a far cry from the spoiled girl who'd once scoffed at the idea of working. She wasn't exactly friendly toward me, but there was a grudging respect in her attitude now, as if she finally understood what I'd been trying to teach her. For the first time in months, I felt like I was truly free. Talia and Maren's schemes had failed, their lies had been exposed, and their perfect little world had come crashing down around them. I wasn't done rebuilding my life yet, but I was finally on the right path. And this time, I wasn't carrying their baggage with me. The day the court date was set felt like the beginning of the end. Talia was barely speaking, Maren had started looking for ways to survive on her own, and I was preparing to see this through. Despite the tension in the house, I felt lighter knowing that their manipulations would soon be behind me. One evening, Maren approached me, her tone uncharacteristically soft. "Lucas," she said, standing awkwardly in the doorway of the living room, I'm sorry." I looked up from my book, unsure if I'd heard her right. "What was that?" She sighed, looking down. I said I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't realize how much we were hurting you. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Apologies are good, Maren," I said, "but actions mean more. You want to show you're sorry? Fix your life. Be better." She nodded, biting her lip. "I'm trying." "I hope so," I said, turning back to my book. Meanwhile, Talia was unraveling faster. She spent hours on the phone with lawyers, desperately trying to salvage what little she had left. One day, she slammed her phone down on the counter, tears streaming down her face. "They're charging me, Lucas," she cried. "Do you even care?" I stood calmly, facing her. "Do you think I should? After everything you did?" Her shoulders slumped, and for once, she had no retort. When the court date arrived, Talia looked like a shadow of the confident woman she once was. She avoided my gaze as the judge read through the evidence, the affair, the embezzlement, the financial misconduct. It was all laid bare for the court to see. Maren wasn't present, though I'd made it clear she could have attended if she wanted to support her mother. Instead, she'd sent me a text the night before, "I can't face it, Lucas. But I'm sorry for what we did to you." The judge ruled in my favor, granting me the house, the majority of our shared assets, and full control of the remaining finances. Talia's future looked grim, with the charity pressing charges and Silas refusing to take responsibility for his part in the crime. As we left the courtroom, Talia stopped me in the hallway. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You pick up the pieces," I said, not unkindly. "And you live with the choices you made." She nodded, tears in her eyes, before turning and walking away. By the end of the week, Talia had moved out, leaving the house eerily quiet. Maren stayed a little longer but eventually found a small apartment and started working part-time. She still had a long way to go, but she was trying. As for me, I was finally free. Free from their lies, their manipulations, and the constant weight of their betrayal. I started focusing on myself, my health, my career, and my own happiness. It wasn't easy, but every day felt a little brighter. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Talia and Maren had underestimated me, and now they were facing the consequences. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain, it was mine to build, and I wasn't looking back. The silence in the house was strange at first. For years, my life had been wrapped around Talia and Maren, whether it was working overtime to provide for them or navigating their constant demands. Now, the stillness felt heavy, yet liberating. I spent the first few days reorganizing, throwing out the reminders of the life we'd shared. Talia's leftover clothes, Maren's abandoned trinkets, and anything else tied to their lies went into boxes and out the door. It felt like shedding old skin, making way for something new. One evening, Maren called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She sounded hesitant, almost nervous. I wanted to let you know I found a better job, she said. It's nothing fancy, but it's stable. That's good, Maren, I said simply. There was a long pause before she added, I wanted to thank you for everything you did, even if I didn't appreciate it back then. I see it now. Her words caught me off guard. You've still got a lot to prove, but I'm glad you're starting to figure things out, I said. I'm trying, she whispered before hanging up. It wasn't closure, not exactly, but it was something. I began focusing on rebuilding. I started exercising again, reconnecting with old friends, and even looking into hobbies I'd long neglected. It felt good to have space for myself, to make decisions without worrying about how they'd be twisted or taken advantage of. One day, I walked past a cafe downtown and saw Talia through the window, sitting alone. She looked smaller somehow, less vibrant than I remembered. For a fleeting moment, I considered going in, saying something, but I didn't. Instead, I kept walking, knowing there was nothing left to say. I wasn't looking back anymore. My future was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. With Talia and Maren out of the picture, I could finally focus on myself. It felt strange at first, this newfound freedom. For so long, my every thought had been consumed by providing, fixing, and enduring. Now the weight was gone, and I realized I had no idea what I wanted. I started small. Mornings were mine again, no rushed chaos or fake pleasantries. I'd sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise and letting my mind wander. It became a ritual, a reminder that I was rebuilding piece by piece. Work was steady, and I threw myself into it, not out of necessity this time, but because it gave me a sense of control. My colleagues noticed the change. You seem lighter, one of them said during lunch. I just smiled, knowing they'd never understand how much I'd shed to get here. Maren called occasionally, updates about her job or life. Her tone was different now, not entitled, but reflective. I've been budgeting, she told me one day, almost proudly. It's harder than I thought, but I'm managing. That's good, Maren, I said. Keep it up. She didn't ask for help anymore, and I didn't offer. It was her journey now. As for Talia, she stayed silent, which was fine by me. Through the grapevine, I heard she was struggling with a legal fallout. Silas had cut ties completely, leaving her to fend for herself. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly, I just felt detached. She was a chapter I'd closed. I started reconnecting with old friends, people I'd drifted away from during the years I'd spent tangled in Talia's web. One night, over drinks, a buddy of mine asked, "What's next for you, Lucas?" I paused, genuinely considering the question. "Whatever I want," I said finally, the weight of those words sinking in. And I meant it. My life was mine again, and I was just getting started.